Welcome back. Federal employees say they're as dedicated as they've ever been, but they're less confident their opinions will change things in their organizations. Those are just a couple of takeaways from this year's Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, but the most troublesome number in the whole survey might be a surprise. To take a closer look at the FEVS numbers, Steve Goodrich, President and CEO of the Center for Organizational Excellence, and Mary Schwartz, Senior Vice President of Digital and Technology at ICF. Folks, thanks very much for joining me. Steve, I'll start with you. Your primary takeaway, or maybe two, from the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey numbers?
Well, a couple. I think you know that the response rate was down, but the numbers were up. You know, there were typically 1 million surveys sent out. This year was 1.5 million. Went up by about 130,000. So that's good, but the response rate was down, and it's trending down. And I think there's a couple of things there. One is I think there's starting to be a little bit of fatigue with the survey, and not fatigue in taking it, but fatigue in saying, you know, I've got to, I don't know if it's actually going to result in anything, and why should I keep doing this? The other is there's sort of a lot of disruption in the market right now with all the reforms and knowing what's going on and whether this is going to be meaningful or not.
Mary, what did you think when you saw the numbers?
Well, I agree. It was interesting to see that that the numbers were down pretty consistently across agencies. Some had some uptick. And I think your point about, Steve, your point related to the fatigue with the survey was really something that came through. One of the top negative concerns was that these results don't actually, completing the survey doesn't actually result in change. And so there's got to be a lot of frustration where you continue to go through the same issues, or raising the same issues and same perspective, but not seeing anything come of it.
A week or so before the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey numbers came out, there's a story in Government Executive about a very similar survey within the Department of Veterans Affairs, talking about how the morale has gone up according to these numbers at VA. But I thought as soon as that came out, aren't we supposed to get FEVS numbers here in just a very short period of time? They come out another week. And so it's not just, Steve, the annual OPM survey that maybe people are getting tired of. It's all the surveys all the time, it seems, about what morale is like and all of that.
You're absolutely right. I think there is quite a bit, and people are still wondering what their place is in government. But you also saw that employee engagement was up a tick, you know, maybe just 1 percentage point. And supporting that was support for my supervisors, support for leadership, even though leadership is low, and a little bit more satisfaction with my job, which was interesting.
Where do you think? Oh, go ahead.
I do think you have to look at the individual agencies, though. And we've been hearing a lot about USDA and the Department of Education having lower numbers. There's a lot going on in change there, and it all really comes down to change management and how we're approaching these reforms, implementing change, and really working with the employees so that they continue to be engaged.
One of the things that I've heard, Mary, over the dozen years or so that I've been covering these numbers is you have to look at them in most of the cases at longer than just a year.
Exactly.
Year to year is not necessarily the best way to do it. I imagine that's especially applicable at a place where there is a tremendous amount of change because it takes time for those employees to understand how it's going to affect them, whether it's going to be that terrible or not, and all of those kinds of things. Is that fair?
Completely fair. And part of what you have to look at is that initial change, the reaction of how is this affecting me, but then how are you actually acculturating it? How are you introducing adoption? And we actually, ICF ran a survey. And it's funny because I do agree there's a certain degree of survey fatigue. We ran a survey earlier this year that started to look at adoption as a factor in terms of measuring success of programs, and it really was on the lower end of success measures. And it's funny because that's a tangible, actionable, very measurable piece, and we're not necessarily valuing it because adoption directly connects into satisfaction and engagement. The more you see adoption, the more willingness toward it, the more you're going to see employees responding. And often they have to be part of that process. So, and Steve and I were actually talking about this a little bit before. I know you had some thoughts on how change is going and how change is actually being worked in terms of strategy versus at a local level versus kind of at a group level.
Yeah, and that was getting to the disruptive piece, certainly across. With all the reform initiatives, people don't know quite what's in it for me. There's also something else, a comparative analysis, and a little bit of a conflict in the survey. When you look at all the questions that were rated very high, my skill level, how I'm able to contribute, my working group, how we work together to get things done, those were all very high. But when you also look at the numbers that were low, there's a little bit of a conflict in there, and that is training's not being provided, we're promoting the wrong people, we're not getting, we can't hire top talent, and there's a subtlety of a conflict in there that really needs to be looked at.
My overall takeaway from these numbers is that, and it goes back to this contextual thing that I mentioned a moment ago, Mary, not much has changed. No agencies that I saw that jumped out at me went dramatically up or down. No engagement numbers went dramatically up or down. No, we're just kind of keep it on, and that's not necessarily a good thing, is it, Steve?
No, it's not, but I will say that in a long time, there's no opportunity like the present, because there's more energy, there's more money, there's more focus on these reforms and getting things done. And as a result of the Viewpoint Survey, OMB and OPM has said, we want to increase engagement, we want to fix the hiring process, and we want to reskill our workers. Now, they've got to be able to follow through with that if those are tangible outcomes.
Mary,
Well, it's
30
interesting.
seconds, Mary.
Yeah.
So when I think about the hiring, there are more factors than just having training in the current environment. We have to look at the systems that people are using. As government's looking to modernize and the technologies that are available, the workforce that's coming in doesn't want to see things that are 30, 40 years old. And that intentional approach to digital transformation and IT modernization has to be present. And the disruption, you're absolutely right. We should be seeing greater volatility in the numbers.
Mary, Steve, thanks both very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us,
Thank you.
Francis.